Welcome to another segment of my YouTube channel. It's a pleasure to have in my midst Dr. Gilbert Morris. And I want to start very to the point and allow Mr. Morris to introduce himself. So Dr. Morris, tell the audience who you are.
Troublemaker.
No, you're not. A good troublemaker.
Yes, John Lewis is good trouble, eh? Well, I was a professor at George Mason University. I taught in 4 faculties there. I was scholar in residence at the law school, and then a professor of history, professor of philosophy and religion, and also a professor of English and comparative literature. And I was director of the African American Studies program, also for 2 terms at the university. But I taught all around. I was a member of the Mid-Atlantic Scholars Association at Princeton University. And when I came home, I was retained by the Swiss Private Bankers Association as their chief economic consultant once the international financial centers had been blacklisted by the OECD, and then served as a senior advisor to the Ministry of Finance in Turks and Caicos, and then the special appointment by the Premier, Galmo Williams, the Honorable Galmo Williams, to the All-Party Committee at the House of Lords. And so I've served in those sorts of roles, and lots of consulting all over the world, and was scheduled actually to head up the Bahamas Embassy for Business at the Expo 2020 in Dubai, but COVID-19 had other plans.
Yeah.
So I spent the last 11 months. I've read maybe 2,700 peer-reviewed journal reports and studies on COVID-19, and one of the things I'm keen to explain is that pandemics have very little to do with medicine. They have more to do with econometrics. They have to do with interstitial demographics. They have to do with data aggregation and data analysis. And they have to do with training public officials not to assume that they know anything, but to learn how to learn, unlearn, and relearn in real time. So that's been, I've done maybe 500 Zoom calls, in these recent months with airlines and hotels and companies, and written quite a number of reports on this issue. And so I'll be giving actually starting on the 28th, and then each month for 4 months, lectures on the Global Roundtable sponsored by SpaceNex and on a pay-per-view basis. And these will be 4 major lectures uplinked to 100 countries around the world.
So how can we join that? Anyone could join those lectures?
Yes, the ads will be posted all over social media, but I'll make sure send you a link that you can share with your viewers. And we have persons who were directly involved in the science behind the vaccines. We have persons who were direct advisors, along with myself, to governments. And so some of that will be revealed on the kind of work that I was doing on the economic side, looking at the economic impact, because pandemics are social events and they have profound social and legal implications, such as contact tracing on fundamental rights and privacy and so on. So we have an astronaut who will be talking about the difference between the world, cultures, and the earth, the physical, natural thing, and how it looked to him from outer space. And we'll be talking to physicists, mathematicians, various extinction risk experts, and national security officials from around the world, and from people, experts and scholars from 33 countries around the world, from ambassadors to former presidents to former ministers of finance and health and so on, all to try to frame this moment correctly. And we're saying that we're providing the ordinary citizen with an intelligence briefing, a global intelligence briefing, which is usually reserved at the highest level for senior politicians, but we think the citizens of the world deserve this sort of knowledge.
Yes. So, I mean, based on what you've read, and I know you're going to have these shows coming over a 4-month period, what do you think leaders in the Caribbean, particularly the Turks and Caicos Islands and the Bahamas, have done different over the past 10 months in dealing with this pandemic?
The number one thing is that I told every leader of every Caribbean country in December to January of 2019 and 2020, I told them to borrow big and borrow now. And very few governments heeded that. Cayman did a version of that, but what Cayman did was enhance their financial services capacity while closing their borders to tourism. But Cayman did the second thing that I advised, and they did it the best of any country in the world, and that is Cayman repositioned itself, not for a post-COVID period, because I don't believe there will be a post-COVID at all, but they positioned themselves to be a different kind of Cayman Islands, given the reality of COVID-19. So they reformed their social systems. They made their country more inclusive, more consistent with the Constitution. They revised their education service delivery programs. They got investment in their health city so they can boost the idea of being a health center, changing the profile of Cayman from merely financial services or tourism to a health, a center of excellence for global health, which I think is tremendous, a tremendous achievement. And they refined their legislative structure to remove red tape, not just, when we talk about red tape, most people think you're talking about, how government relates to the private sector. But Cayman was very clever in recognizing the second half of red tape. Maybe the top 70% of red tape is how legislation and regulations, how legislation gets done or regulations get promulgated. And they streamline that process. And so Cayman is poised very well. I think Turks and Caicos has a strong record of doing reasonably well. I didn't agree with all of the decisions, but we never agree with all decisions which governments have made. I think the idea of Turks and Caicos will be the first country in the world where 100% of its citizens will ostensibly be vaccinated, right? And that is an enormous achievement. The key thing, though, is that we have to learn how to use these achievements not as trophies, but as tools. So when you have an achievement like that, you don't throw your hands up and say, and I'm not saying the government's doing this, but we have a tendency to do this. Don't throw your hands up and say, oh, wow, we did that. No, we have to be very, very clever and say, we have to have the third, fourth, and fifth moves. Right. So we borrowed $80 million. We borrowed at a very, very good rate. In fact, probably the lowest rate available in the world at the moment. I'm suggesting that we're going to need to borrow at least $300 million. And we'll need that when we use that money. We must not make the mistake of so many countries in the Caribbean, including the Bahamas, I have to say, where we borrow that money. Well, in the case of Turks and Caicos, we don't have to shore up reserves, right, foreign reserves, but borrowing that money to pay past bills. That is not the right thing to do. And we shouldn't borrow money to give stimulus. We should borrow money to reconfigure the economy so that the coverage that being 100% vaccinated gives us means that we can be part of the conversation of the new health security-based travel that will become the reality in the next 3 years.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so if we are the world's, if we got to stop. We shouldn't say, hey, we are a country where 100% of people are vaccinated. We should say it the other way around, that we are the country that is the leading health, security, hospitality center in the world. And that our next move now has to be to enter the stage of electronic government, digitized government, better democracy. And just because we're vaccinated does not mean that you cannot transmit the disease. What this vaccination does is it teaches the body how to fight the disease in the local environment of your own body. But you can still be infectious. So we still have to observe protocol, and we still have to be smart about what we do. But because the world is looking at us because we're 100% vaccinated, we should use that moment that the world is looking at us to do the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things that hardens our reputation. Just as Cayman has done as a health center, we should harden our reputation as a high-end luxury center that's safe for the world to attend. And the reason that this is important is I've been saying this for 20 years, no one has developed an economics around this. But if the premier came to me and said, Morris, plot the next stage for Turks and Caicos, I would say, Madam Premier, give me the immigration ordinance, and I will build you an economy such as you've never seen before. So the secret is in the 100 million retirees in North America. And remember this, that economists constantly worry about where demand is coming from. So you can go to a financial advisor and you can actually, you can build a beautiful hotel or proposition. The economist comes along and says, okay, that's very, very pretty, but where's the demand coming from? And is it sustainable? Right. And when I look at the macro environment, right, how do you justify, whether or not these lines of revenue run out in 6 months, a year, 9 months, since you don't control any of the mechanisms that generate that revenue, right? You don't control that. You're merely a recipient of it. And that's the case for small developing island states, micro-states as we call them. However, Turks and Caicos and the rest of the Caribbean can be in a unique position. And it was my view that if we had borrowed in January when I advised, we should have had the largest economic boom in our history in the last 11 months. But we are still able to do that. And that is if we position ourselves, because you have in the United States drivers for people to get out of there.
But then how will, I understand you say we have borrowed from January 2020, but we find that people, you say drive the economy, and our economy is based primarily on tourism. Yes. How will we be able to, change people's habits of traveling, because the people were traveling less, and now with the United States requiring residents or visitors to have a test taken within 3 days of travel, how will we be able to impact that, though?
Two ways. Number one, stick with the highest end, wealthiest travelers.
Okay.
Number two, give incentives for longer stays, 15 to 30 days. Number three, get people to retire to Turks and Caicos. Yeah. So there's no issue of the travel. And if you did those three things, that would actually bring in its train. So people talk about diversifying the economy. This is a bad idea. Governments for 144 years have tried to diversify economies. Only governments that are willing to kill large numbers of their people have been successful. Dictatorships, all right? Mm-hmm. So whether it's China or Russia or any of these countries, but in countries such as ours, the business model that we have adopted is what is called sticky. So because people keep investing in the things that they can see are the things that are producing the income. So the
But I
systems
think,
that are producing.
but I understand what you're saying by diversification, but I think when we talk about diversification, what we are suggesting is don't let us just depend on tourism only. At least have another industry other than tourism.
Yeah, but having another industry in economic terms means cost, research, market positioning, all those kinds of things. And that takes a kind of planning that we have never been good at in the history of these countries.
Okay, got you.
And that's number one. Number two, the best, most efficient way to diversify is within the core industry of your existing dominant industry. So let me give you an example of that. Our dominant industry is not tourism, it's hospitality.
Yes, hospitality.
And hospitality is a broad mixture of a wide variety of things. So when you think of it like that, if we say, are we number one in this aspect, luxury hospitality, I would say that Turks and Caicos is at least in the top 3 to the top 5 of that luxury space in terms of brand value.
Yeah.
So my brother-in-law played in the NFL for the Denver Broncos, and then he got a bigger contract for the San Diego Chargers. And when he got his second contract, he was heard to say that now he could go to Turks and Caicos. So obviously, people associate Turks and Caicos with their higher success. So I think that there are a few countries, jurisdictions in that position. So obviously, Switzerland, Monaco, St. Bart's, Saint-Tropez, the Maldives, Turks and Caicos. These are the names that produce an exotic sense, an exotic response. So again, the question is not to just celebrate and make that a trophy, but to leverage it, to use it, to have policies and programs that hang on it. So if we said, hey, we're number 5 of the top, we want to become number 1. In order to become number 1, you'd have to retrain your civil servants, restructure parts of your civil service, probably if I were premier, I'm never going to be premier because I'm not eating anybody's pot cake or kissing anybody's babies. So if I were premier, I would abolish the Ministry of Tourism and I would create in its place a tourism corporation. And that tourism corporation would be responsible for all touristic assets in the country.
You mean like
to make sure
body or?
It would be a quasi, you could actually put it into the sovereign fund and really make it, a corporate entity, because what you need is a non-political operation that operates at the speed of business.
Yes.
All right, at the speed of business. And they would be responsible for protecting the tourist product, because if someone's applying for work permits, politicians don't necessarily know all the breakdowns, and it becomes political. But if you have a private agency that belongs to the people of Turks and Caicos, so in the case of Singapore, the Singaporean government owns 89% of all rental property and 90% of all real estate in the country. Really? But it's held by the sovereign fund. So the average Singaporean, when they see an expatriate, their point is, okay, you're paying rent to me and I'm getting a portion of your fees. So it doesn't really matter to me so I had recommended years ago that no hotel should own their staff quarters. Those staff quarters should be owned by the sovereign fund of Turks and Caicos.
I agree with you 100% on that, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So that's one way of ensuring that as you grow, you actually pay dividends to your own people, right? And so if you imagine so back to this point about diversification, if you say you want to go from number 5 to number 1, well, then you're going to have to train your civil servants. You're going to have to adopt some technology. You're going to have to adopt advanced technology, in fact. You're going to have to build national booking systems. You're going to have to streamline your advertising. And then when you do all of this, you're actually producing new industries, because to drive yourself to the top, to number 1, you'd actually have to create 10% of GDP from technology. To drive yourself to number one, you'd actually have to create maybe 3 or 4% of GDP in management systems training and so on to be able to be successful at that. And countries like Norway, countries like Estonia, countries like Singapore, every time they do something that's successful, they then turn that into a course and they sell that. Did you see my point? Yeah. So now you're in the education business, but the education business is based on your proven success. You are the example of the curricula that you are selling. And so if we took that approach, what we would do is within the hospitality space, we would move to retirees, luxury retirement in Turks and Caicos. But what would that do? Well, that would put you firmly in financial services, right? That would build a real financial services option for Turks and Caicos. So rather than just porks or hybrid reinsurance companies, we'd really have platformed estate management financial services, because the retirees, with the retirees in North America, there's going to be about a $40 trillion wealth transfer from the baby boomers' parents to them, and from the baby boomers to their children. All right, that wealth transfer is happening now. And so you would be able to structure that. It would cause a boom in the insurance industry. It would cause a boom in the construction industry. It would cause a boom in the design industry. And it would build a new type of medical. So if we look at Cayman and we say Cayman has Health City, okay, but that Health City is not necessarily tied to their real estate and their construction development. But what if we had retirees? Then suddenly we'd have, so all of a sudden we make a deal with an international university, and we are training not necessarily only physicians and nurses, but we're training dialysis technicians, radiologists, we're training anesthesiologists, we're training exercise physiologists, we're training nurses assistants, physicians assistants, medical records, docu management, all these sorts of things. And all of a sudden, the very same health culture that retirees need becomes extended, a health culture extended to the people of Turks and Caicos, where we have significant problems of obesity, of diabetes, high blood pressure, all these, some sickle cell and so on, heart problems and so on. So this health and wellness culture actually bleeds over into our local environment.
I love it. You're right. You're right.
And this is how you generate. This is how you use that $300 million to position Turks and Caicos for this opportunity. And it seems to me that with the retirees, you're talking about the next 35 to 50 years. And so you're talking about an extended boom. But the beauty is, no matter what happens in the United States, the retirees already have their money. And so they are going to spend money. The long-term stays, the luxury long-term stays already have their money, and financial services. So that would be the three businesses of Turks and Caicos primarily: technology, construction and design, health, a broad panoply of health services, right?
Right, and that in itself, that's diversification. Yeah.
That's the point I'm making. You diversify within the core business that you're in. And all of a sudden, the Turks and Caicos Islanders in the next generation, not there's anything wrong with being taxi drivers and being workers in hotels in the hospitality business, but Turks and Caicos Islanders, like Switzerland, would transfer out of the hospitality business and into the professional certification area, where you are a physician's assistant, a nurse's assistant, a nutritionist, an exercise physiologist, occupational therapist, all these sorts of things. And you can imagine in that situation, we are Caribbean people, and Turks and Caicos Islanders, Barbadians, and Bahamians in particular love credentials. So we have credentialitis. So if I think that the average Turks and Caicos Islander, if you said to young people today, you are going to be wearing a white coat and you will have a professional certification behind your name, and you will have your own associate. So the Association of Radiologists, the Association of Nutritionists, the Association of, alternative healing systems and so on, alternative medicine and that sort of thing. And they are professionals, and there are courses at the community college, which should become the College of Turks and Caicos. And when you have these sorts of things, people feel a sense of pride about themselves, and they feel themselves professionals. And now, and think about that in the construction industry. It means you need alternative energy engineers. It means you need smart home systems developers and installers. It means you need people who are expert at solar energy and so on. Mm-hmm. It means you need professional landscapers and people of that sort. It means you need maintenance technicians of every kind. Mm-hmm. All of these are certified positions. Yes. Where you could have, so Turks and Caicos would become the #1 country in the world that has associations for its various professions. And like Sweden, like Switzerland, Turks and Caicos Islanders belongers would move to the 2/3 top tier of the society, while we would have expatriates and migrant workers who would be occupying that first third. And the friction between Turks and Caicos Islanders and expatriates, it seemed to me, would diminish significantly, because if you're living in your own country and you are a professional in an industry that is blossoming and has a long shelf life, and at the same time, the presence of the expatriate and the migrant workers is putting money in your pocket annually through the sovereign fund, it seems to me that you've got the best of both worlds.
That sounds like a plan. I mean, the thing is now, how do we get this plan in action?
Well, you and I both know that we have tried. When we've gotten to that point, we have tried. And Turks and Caicos has an advantage over Jamaica, Bahamas, Barbados, Trinidad, in the sense that it doesn't have deeply vested economic interests within the native population. We have developed a system where, look, and these are realities we have to face. The expatriate community has grown to a degree. The two communities, three Turks and Caicos Islands. There are three. The expatriate community has grown to such a degree that they can function in Turks and Caicos without contact with any Turks and Caicos Islander.
That is true.
Whether they want schools, whether they want healthcare, I'm not saying they're doing it or they want to do it, but whether they want schools, healthcare, lawyers, accountants, physicians, whatever it is, they can function without Turks and Caicos Islanders. The migrant community can also basically do that, right? They can function. I was on a talk show once, and a very beautiful Haitian fellow came up to me afterwards. He met me out at my usual cafe, the Sandbar, and he said to me, I listened to you on the radio. You made one mistake. So I said, oh, really? Tell me my mistake. Mm-hmm. He says, well, you said that a country, you know it's your country when you've mastered all the access points of that country. You know how to get things done, and you master all the access points. He says, well, if that's the case, then this is a Haitian country, because we know how to arrive, how to stay, how to get our children educated, how to get medical care, all that outside the system. So we know the country better than you do. And I had to accept that, okay, that's a true, I'm not sure I'm happy. I'm not sure I'm happy about that, but it's a true statement.
It's a valid point.
Yeah, but it's a very, very interesting point. So the Turks and Caicos Islander, and this Donahue, the Honorable Donahue Gardner, and myself, and some of my other colleagues, Norman Hamilton, brilliant Turks and Caicos Islanders, as you know, we would have these conversations, and Stanley Williams and some others, and we talk about what it means to be a Turks and Caicos Islander, and whether or not that meaning has diminished in terms of real life opportunities. Can you lay in your bed in Turks and Caicos and tonight decide you're going to change your life? And when you go, is there a government office that you can go to and initiate that change with the support of the government? And if you're prepared to work hard and so on, yes. But the problem that you have in Turks, and I made this point many years ago, the pricing mechanism, we need expatriates, but the pricing mechanism of expatriates creates, if you like, disequilibrium in the opportunities or the hurdles that Turks and Caicos Islanders have to go through. So I'll give you an example which you may recognize, but I won't say who it is. So let's imagine there's a furniture store, furniture supply store in, let's say, Salt Mills, right? Let's say some years ago. I won't say any more than that, right? Now let's imagine that you have a young Turks and Caicos Islander interior designer who wants the contract to outfit, a luxury hotel. Well, first of all, that existing expatriate has a shop and is paying like $12,000 a year rent, but they're paying $12,000 a year rent because they have an inside track. They got that contract on a golf course in North Carolina, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a natural thing. I'm not accusing expatriates of anything. I'm just saying this is a natural thing. So they got that contract. You were not on that golf course in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. You just don't have access. So that person gets all, there's 80 rooms, 100 rooms, they get all of that. So they can afford to pay the $12,000 a month. So you're coming in buying your vase and you're wondering, how's this person keeping this place open? I mean, it's very expensive stuff. The place is huge. You're paying all that money, but that's because there's a economic model from which no one tried to exclude you, but the fact is you are excluded. So the Turks and Caicos Islander doesn't have that access and can't compete with that contract. But there's another thing happening. It allows for rent inflation. So that person can maintain a $12,000 rent. Yeah. So every Turks and Caicos Islander who wants to rent in that place has to match that rent, even though they don't share the economic reality of that person, of that interior designer. So you have these disequilibriums, and you have dozens of them throughout the society. Same thing with law firms, accounting firms, same thing with consulting firms, as you and I both know, same things. And we've had loads of situations, sometimes it's even our own governments, that hire people, then those people come to us to ask us, where Salt Key is, and, and they come and they ask and so on. Or I remember a fellow coming to me saying that, well, Turks and Caicos Islands has multiple revenue streams. Turns out his background was in accounting, not in economics, and he didn't understand the generator functions of tourism and real estate sales compared to, say, business licensing. And my point is, no, business licensing is a subset of those generator function revenue streams. Mm-hmm. You can't mix them together and just list them out as revenue streams, right? One is generated by the other. If you didn't have tourism and you didn't have real estate sales, you wouldn't have no licensing because there wouldn't be any cash for that, right? And so understanding these structures, or I was explaining to another one, we have 5 billionaires in the center of the the hospitality space in Turks and Caicos. With the exception of beaches, really, the other 4 billionaires, Turks and Caicos is kind of a plaything for them. I mean, I'm not saying that it is a plaything. I mean, but they don't need it. This is not their main business, right? So Lord Ashcroft is not really in the hospitality business. Ong Beng Seng is not really in the hospitality business. Mortimer Sackler is not really in the hospitality business. When I say that, that's not his originating business.
I understand.
Right? The Emir of Qatar is not in the hospitality business as his originating business. So we're dealing with people where shut the place down and it does have no real in that situation. when you try to create policy for those kinds of situations, you have to have a different policy process from the policy process that we're used to. So we're used to a top-down government where you give directives and then people follow it. But if you have a person who's richer than the entire country, it's very difficult to get that person to adhere. And you can say, I've spoken to ministers and they said to me, well, this billionaire is gonna follow the rules because wherever they go in the world, they have to follow the rules. I go, yeah, but that billionaire in the United States, the US doesn't need him. We need him.
Yeah.
Now, so the question really isn't to fight for supremacy. The question is to generate a hospitality of business that allows us to recognize the position of that billionaire, but to be able to maneuver them and bring them over to our side by constant negotiation. And you can never see, one of the problems we have is we negotiate something and we think it's finished.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is the world is shifting. We are tiny and we don't control any of the forces. So
people have choices, they don't have to be here.
They have choices. And Turks and Caicos has to have a new management mindset. It's key to the future. We can't just see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have to see the tunnels behind the light at the end of the tunnel. We have to constantly see the new tunnels that are hidden from us by what appears to be the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, if we had that mindset, there would be less fighting with these persons, and Turks and Caicos could have had an economy twice its current size. Because there's no way I would have those billionaires on my landscape without leveraging their contacts and the international associations they have for the benefit of Turks and Caicos Islanders. And by now, I would have set up a charity at the Ministry of Education, and outside of the normal contribution to the education fund, I would have actually had a major charity for education. And Turks and Caicos would have the most advanced education system in the world. And that's how we have to think.
Yeah.
Last point on that, in 2007, I led a mission, an official visit by then Deputy Premier Floyd Hall to Singapore, Hong Kong, and Wall Street. And he performed, and all the Turks and Caicos Islanders who were there. And I know politically people make something of that, but there were PDMs and PNPs on that trip, civil servants and people like that, and members from the Bar Association, the Accountants Association, and so on. And listen, the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore came into the room, and he said to us, the question was asked of him, how many expats do you have in the country? He says 1.4 million. So someone asked, well, out of 2,800,000 people, you have 1.4 million? He goes, yes. Question was asked, how do you process all of that? He says, we don't. When you get a work permit, your work permit meets you at the airport. We make sure, we perform that as a hospitality. We make sure that when you get a job in Singapore, your entry into Singapore is smooth and unencumbered. So it was asked, well, how do Singaporeans feel about that? They say, well, those people contribute to the Singapore Sovereign Fund, which pays out to Singaporeans every year. So in 2019, it paid out $36,000 to every Singaporean.
Wow.
Right? So that's one. Number two, he was asked, well, okay, I get that, but what about their jobs? He says, oh, that's easy. We don't depend on companies to train our employees. We train Singaporeans. And we train them so well that before our companies go for expatriates, they fight over Singaporeans.
Wow.
because we trained them so well. So in a small place like Turks and Caicos, what are the things that people say? Oh, we don't have, we need language skills. Oh, you don't have international exposure. Okay, if we know that already, shouldn't we have had a plan with, say, some of the brands that we're associated with, like One and Only or something like that, or hotel brands in Canada like Fairmont, or Barry Sternlicht's group, or and have internship programs, management internship programs? Shouldn't we have negotiated with Sandals to have internship programs where we send our people to 3 or 4 different countries and so on, even Turkey, where
well, I think Sandals does that.
Adopted Sandals does do that. And so my point is, if investors or people don't have exposure, don't fight them on that, because running a hotel in Turks and Caicos where you've an excellent manager, but the fact is you've never had a crisis where you have run a big hotel in New York City and Madonna shows up and there's no rooms, and the media is there that can frame the brand, your brand, in a certain way, or you have a gender issue and there's the New York Times attacking you. Having that kind of experience is very important. Okay, then as a government, we should angle to put our people in those positions. You have young lawyers, they come back home, they don't have, okay, we should do deals with Canada and Cayman and New Zealand and these places, and move our people around and have those kinds of sister city relationships.
Experience matters. And once they get the experience, they can do whatever they want to do.
They can do whatever and so if you think about it, we have the Emir of Qatar. Qatar has one of the world's leading financial centers. So we should have done a sister city program. You see, he says, I want to do the Bellagio development. I want these concessions. You say, okay, you can have all the concessions you want. We want 50 people a year for the next 5 years to be posted at the Qatar Financial Center and actually learning and ghosting with senior executives there and be part of the team and learn how to run a finance. Those people are not necessarily going to be financial services professionals. That may be your new attorney general. That may be your new public prosecutor. That may be your new chief justice.
Exactly.
So you have to, so as a small country, we have to stop using these cliched responses to things. As I say, stop using these things as trophies and start using them as tools. One last point. We have a tourism, a hospitality industry that's based on condo hotels. We need condo hotels, and we need them in the iteration that they are, because the economies of scale mean that to amortize a debt, you know this better than I do, to amortize a debt for an EP, a regular hotel like your Marriott's and things like that, is very difficult for any investor to justify. You can buy land in Turks and Caicos and every board of directors will go, oh yes, that's great, wonderful. As soon as you say I'm putting 400 rooms on it, they go, well, how is that gonna work, right? That's what they ask.
I know.
But the sovereign fund of Turks and Caicos can own a 300-room EP hotel because we aren't going anywhere.
Exactly.
So we could take the long-term amortization. So by now, the people of Turks and Caicos, like the JW Marriott in Santo Domingo, we should have owned now under our sovereign fund a Marriott, a Hilton, or a Hyatt hotel, or the Shangri-La, or one of those hotels, which is a regular EP hotel that we could bear the cost, depending on the economics, of course, that we could bear the cost over time. And it doesn't have to be a giant sort of dormitory style residential hotel. It could be in the tradition of Turks and Caicos, spread out over a vast landscape like Amenyares and so on. But that's a hotel that belongs to the people of Turks and Caicos, and it's run by this tourism corporation, an independent management team. And I'm sure someone like yourself, after your long experience as an executive, would love nothing more than to be able to run a national hotel that's part of the national pride of Turks and Caicos and so on. So the problem is we haven't created places for executives like yourself to go, right? We haven't done that. Mm-hmm. And you should be running now, all that experience you have, you should be running part of the natural patrimony and have a staff of 10, 15 young Turks and Caicos Islanders under you who you're running through a management program and sending off around the world to other JW Marriotts all over the world. So they have to do 5 countries before they come back to Turks and Caicos. Yeah. And then you could comfortably retire and say, I have put my country, I've served my country just as people serve in the military in other countries. Mm-hmm. I've served my country and I built up a farm team of brilliant young executives that can now take the mantle and move Turks and Caicos forward, you see?
Well, Dr. Morris, I want to thank you very much. I really enjoyed this session. Let's follow up.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful, and I don't have any closing remarks. I just want to say thank you for agreeing to be on my YouTube channel, and I know the viewers and my subscribers will enjoy this segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Listen, man, Turks and Caicos got the magic, and we must keep the magic. And the magic is both our beautiful people and our wonderful landscape.
Thank you.
Absolutely.